We allege that the obvious targeting of Minnesota for our diversity, for our democracy, and our differences of opinion with the federal government is a violation of the Constitution and of federal law. We allege that the surge's reckless impact on our schools, on our local law enforcement, is a violation of the 10th Amendment and the sovereign laws and powers of the Constitution grants to states. We allege that DHS's use of excessive and lethal force, their warrantless, racist arrests, their targeting of our courts, our churches, houses of worship, and schools are a violation of the Administrative Procedures Act on arbitrary and capricious federal actions. And we ask that the courts will end the surge of thousands of DHS agents into Minnesota. We ask the courts to end the DHS unlawful behavior in our state, the intimidation, the threats, the violence. We ask the courts to end the tactics on our places of worship, our schools, our courts, our marketplaces, our hospitals, and even funeral homes.
The air outside the New York courthouse feels heavier than usual, like the city knows something historic is about to break. Helicopters thrum overhead, slow and steady, while crowds press against metal barriers, whispering the same question: is this really happening? Inside, the judge's voice lands like a quiet thunder, calm, firm, final. One more violation, Mr. Trump, and the next step is jail. For a heartbeat, the entire room softens into silence. Not fear, not anger, something deeper. The realization that a line, one nobody ever thought the country would reach, is now just inches away. Trump stiffens, eyes blazing, voice cracking with a mix of rage and disbelief. He shouts that he's being targeted, that this is unfair, that the system is collapsing around him. Reporters lean closer. Marshals inch forward. The atmosphere grows warm, electric, almost human, as if every emotion in the room is breathing at once. And outside? States like Minnesota are already boiling, accusing federal agents of unlawful raids, stormed schools, shaken communities. Tension isn't coming. It's already here. Then, suddenly, Trump slams his hand on the table. Gasps echo. A marshal moves, and in that split second, everything hangs in the balance.
You criticized the tactics that ICE used both before and after the shooting. I want you to take a listen to my interview, part of my interview with the Department of Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem yesterday about the ICE officer who appeared to have fired 3 shots at Renee Good. Take a listen. What is the reason for the second and third shot through the window when he is out? He's not in the line of sight of the car.
This investigation will continue to unfold and more information will come forward. But until that comes, what I would appreciate is everybody sticking to the facts of the situation and recognize that this law enforcement officer took action based on his training to protect himself and the public.
The morning broke with a strange kind of heaviness, the kind that makes a newsroom go silent before the chaos hits. Outside the Manhattan courthouse, the city felt unusually alert. Helicopters circling low, barricades stretching across the block, and a restless crowd murmuring like a storm about to crack open. You could feel it in the air. Something big was coming. Something historic. Something dangerous. Inside the courtroom, reporters leaned over their screens, waiting for the moment everyone knew was coming. Judge Merchan entered without a word, his expression tight, controlled, but carrying that unmistakable weight of someone who had been tested past his limit. The room stiffened. Cameras clicked softly, like nervous breaths. Trump sat at the defense table, arms crossed, jaw locked, eyes burning with that familiar mix of defiance and disbelief. He had violated the gag order for the 10th time, pushing the court to the brink, and today, the consequences finally felt real. The judge picked up the file, pages rustled, the sound seemed to echo through the room. When he spoke, his voice was calm, too calm. "Mr. Trump," he said, "the fines are no longer working. They have no meaningful impact on your conduct. The next step may be incarceration." A ripple of shock rolled across the courtroom. You could almost hear the heartbeat of the country accelerate. Trump blinked hard, like he didn't believe what he'd heard. But the judge didn't stop. "Under New York law," he continued, "you could face up to 30 days in jail, and I intend to use every authority granted to me if these violations continue." Trump's face flushed red. His hands trembled against the table. Then it happened. His voice cracked, sharp and loud, breaking the tension like glass. "This is political targeting," he shouted. "You're silencing me. You're threatening a former president, maybe a future one. Gasps rippled. Marshals shifted. One reporter whispered, "Oh my God," as Secret Service agents subtly repositioned, sensing the spike in tension. The atmosphere warmed with human emotion, fear, anger, disbelief, mixing together until the whole room buzzed. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, news was already leaking. New York corrections officials had prepared a contingency plan, a separate holding area, modified security protocols, Secret Service integration, every detail quietly arranged in case the judge actually went through with the unimaginable. Placing a former president in federal custody. Back in the courtroom, the judge leaned forward. "This is not political," he said firmly. "This is about obeying court orders, and no one, no matter who they are, is above the law." Trump shook his head violently, whispering something to his lawyers, gripping the table with white knuckles. The tension felt alive, crawling across the floor, climbing up the walls, settling in every breath. Cameras flashed like lightning. Reporters scribbled furiously. It felt less like a courtroom and more like the opening scene of a national crisis. Outside, the crowd erupted as word spread. Trump could actually be jailed. Sirens wailed in the distance. A helicopter dipped lower, blades thudding like a warning drum. The city felt like it was teetering on the edge of a story that might redefine American history. Then suddenly, Trump stood up. His chair screeched back. Reporters froze. Marshals tensed. The judge lifted his eyes, surprised. Trump slammed a hand on the table and pointed straight at the bench, his voice rising again, louder, harsher, shaking with fury. And that was the moment everything snapped. But what happened next is the moment the cameras didn't fully catch, the moment that threw the courtroom into chaos. The moment that part 2 will reveal. Because when Trump stood up, he wasn't just standing. He was about to do something no one expected. For a split second, the courtroom froze, every eye locked on Trump as he stood, trembling with a mixture of anger and raw disbelief. His lawyers whispered urgently, tugging at his sleeve, but he pulled away, chest heaving, face flushed. Even the Secret Service agents shifted uneasily, unsure if they should intervene or let the explosion unfold. The judge watched him with a cautious, steady gaze, but even he seemed to sense that the temperature of the room had changed. Something unpredictable had switched on inside Trump. Something dangerous. Trump leaned forward, fists pressed on the table as he pointed directly at the bench. "You want to jail me?" he shouted. "For speaking? For telling the truth? You think the American people will accept this?" His voice cracked, not with fear, but with a desperate fury that made the entire courtroom tighten like a pulled wire. Gasps shot through the gallery. A reporter dropped his pen. A marshal discreetly placed a hand near his radio, ready for whatever came next. Outside, crowds surged toward the barriers as breaking news alerts pinged across phones. "Trump erupts in courtroom after judge issues arrest warning." The street filled with chants, some furious, some terrified, some pleading for calm. The low rumble of the helicopter returned, hovering above the courthouse like a watchful eye. Even the city seemed to pause as word traveled block by block. Trump might actually be taken into custody today. But inside, the moment grew even more intense. Trump's voice softened suddenly, not calmer, but darker. "If you put me in jail," he said, "you won't just be punishing me, you'll be lighting a fuse." His lawyers froze. The judge leaned back, stunned. That sentence drifted through the courtroom like smoke, slow, thick, and dangerous. It wasn't a threat, not in the legal sense, but it carried the weight of something the country wasn't prepared to hear. Something bigger than the trial. Something bigger than the courtroom itself. Judge Merchan cleared his throat. "Mr. Trump, I strongly advise you to sit down." His voice was firm, but there was a tremor, just enough to reveal the pressure he was under. Secret Service agents in black suits stepped subtly closer, not touching Trump, but forming a protective half-circle around him. A marshal whispered into his radio. For a moment, it felt as if the entire courtroom was spiraling toward a point of no return. Trump didn't sit. He stepped back from the table instead, pacing, palms shaking, eyes darting from the judge to the gallery to the security agents. "This is what they want," he said loudly, "to silence me, to put me behind bars, to turn this country into something unrecognizable." His voice cracked again, but this time it carried something almost fragile beneath the fury. Not fear, not despair, something more complicated, something that made even some of his critics lean forward, wondering what exactly was happening behind his expression. Then, without warning, Trump stopped pacing and looked straight at the judge, eyes blazing. "If you want me arrested," he said quietly, "then do it, right now, in front of everyone. A collective gasp shook the room, sharp, loud, unfiltered. One of Trump's attorneys grabbed his arm desperately. "Sir, please, sit down." But he wouldn't. He stood there, chest out, daring the judge, daring the system, daring the moment itself to swallow him whole. For a heartbeat, it looked like the judge might actually respond. His jaw tightened. His fingers gripped the edge of the bench. The air thinned. A faint ringing filled the room. Reporters' cameras powering on, ready to capture history if it unfolded in front of them. Outside, more sirens screamed. Police formed additional barricades. Protesters pushed forward. News choppers circled tighter. The entire city was turning into a pressure cooker, and the courtroom was its ticking center. Judge Merchan finally spoke, voice tight, struggling to maintain control. "Mr. Trump, this is your final warning. Sit down." But Trump didn't move. He simply stared. And that was when the doors at the back of the courtroom burst open. A security officer rushed in, leaning toward the judge's clerk, whispering something urgent. The clerk's face drained of color. She handed the judge a slip of paper. He read it and froze. The courtroom waited, silent, breathless. And then the judge lifted his eyes toward Trump. And what he said next would cha. The sun had slipped behind heavy clouds by the time the third convoy approached the edge of Palm Beach, and the atmosphere had turned electric, charged with something no one could quite name, but everyone could feel. A low rumble moved through the air, not thunder, but the vibration of engines as federal armored vehicles slowed beside the seawall, their presence radiating the kind of authority that silences even the loudest crowd. The reporters who had earlier been shouting questions now spoke in murmurs, their cameras trembling not from the wind but from their own nerves, because everyone sensed it. The real confrontation was seconds away. Inside Mar-a-Lago, the tension was suffocating. Staff who had worked here for years no longer moved with the grace and calm the estate was known for. They whispered urgently in hallways, pressing their backs to the walls as rapid footsteps thundered past. Security teams were no longer walking, they were running. Doors slammed, radios crackled, and somewhere deep inside the residence, someone shouted, "They're moving sooner than expected." Upstairs, the internal crisis room flickered with red warning lights on the monitors. A map of Palm Beach glowed in the center, dotted with flashing icons that showed federal units tightening their perimeter like a closing fist. Every route in or out was marked in red, blocked, monitored, or under surveillance. The House's emergency advisor, voice low and tight, leaned over the table and whispered, "We're running out of time. If we don't act in the next few minutes, control shifts completely." But the real storm was outside. Crowds swelled until they spilled into both lanes of the causeway. Their voices rose into the evening sky, some chanting in defiance, some crying, some recording everything with shaky hands. Helicopters roared overhead, their rotor blades chopping through the air like thunderclaps. A woman in the crowd pressed her hand to her chest and whispered, "This feels like history, but also like the beginning of something dangerous." And she was right. Because that's when it began. Two federal SUVs broke formation and surged forward toward the main gate, fast, decisive, unmistakably executing an order that didn't wait for negotiation. Agents inside were already wearing tactical gear, faces hardened, eyes locked on the estate. The lead vehicle radioed in, gate in visual, proceeding. Mar-a-Lago's front security snapped into motion. Gates clanked shut, reinforced barriers slid into place, and a line of private security formed across the entrance. They weren't armed for battle, but the tension between the two sides could have lit the night on fire. "Hold the position," the head of private security ordered, though his voice cracked slightly, because everyone knew this wasn't a normal standoff. This was something unprecedented, a confrontation between private defenders and federal authority with the entire world watching. Camera flashes exploded like lightning. The first federal agent stepped out of the SUV, his badge glinting under the floodlights. He raised a megaphone and spoke with cold clarity that sliced through the noise. "We have federal authorization to advance. Stand down immediately." The crowd gasped. Some screamed. Reporters surged forward. The entire scene felt like a nerve stretched so tight it could snap from a single breath. Inside, a staff member burst into the crisis room. "They've reached the gate. We don't have minutes anymore. We have seconds." And then something happened that no one, on either side, saw coming. A sharp alarm inside Mar-a-Lago began to wail, echoing across every corridor, every room, every screen. But it wasn't the security team's doing. It wasn't part of any planned protocol. It was triggered from inside, manually. Someone inside the estate had just activated a code that had not been used in years. A code that signaled one thing, a breach. But from who? From where? And why now? The federal agents outside froze, radios crackling with confusion. Private security looked at each other, stunned. The crowd went silent. Inside the estate, lights flickered. Something or someone had just changed the entire situation. And the next move would determine everything, to be continued near the entire fate of the trial. The alarm echoed through every marble hallway of Mar-a-Lago like a warning bell from another era, shrill, relentless, impossible to ignore. Staff scrambled out of rooms, security sprinted toward the interior wing, and in the confusion, no one could identify who triggered it. The monitors in the crisis room flashed red, each screen displaying the same chilling message: internal breach detected, location, East Residence Corridor. But that area was supposed to be locked, secure, empty. A silence heavier than fear swept through the room. "Someone is inside," the advisor whispered, his voice barely audible. "And they're not supposed to be." Downstairs, a team of private security rushed toward the East Corridor, boots pounding against polished floors. The lights above flickered, plunging the hallway into moments of half-darkness. Shadows stretched unnaturally across the walls, and the deeper they moved, the more they felt it, the sense that they weren't alone. Meanwhile, outside, federal agents had paused their advance, but only for a moment. The breach alarm changed everything. Radios were buzzing with new orders, and a supervisor stepped forward, raising his hand. "Proceed with caution," he said into his mic. "Someone inside the residence might be acting independently. This is now a priority security situation." The gates rattled as more federal vehicles rolled in. Helicopters dipped lower, scanning the estate with infrared. In the crowd, panic returned. People shouted over each other, desperate to understand what was happening. Reporters whispered into cameras, their voices shaking with anticipation. This is no longer a standoff. Something inside Mar-a-Lago has gone terribly wrong. Inside, the security team reached the East Corridor and froze. A door that was always locked was standing slightly open. No one touched it. No one went near that wing. Yet there it was, ajar, as if someone had slipped through moments earlier. The team leader raised a hand, signaling silence. He pushed the door slowly, and it creaked open, revealing a room lit only by the glow of a single monitor. Papers were scattered on the floor. A chair lay overturned. And on the desk, in the middle of the chaos, a small encrypted device blinked with a red light. The team exchanged tense glances. This wasn't a break-in. It wasn't an accident. It was deliberate. Before they could inspect further, a thunderous bang shook the outer walls of the estate, followed by shouts and the roar of engines. They rushed to the nearest window and their faces drained of color. Federal agents were advancing, all tactical, no hesitation. From above, the helicopters blasted warnings through loudspeakers. "Stand down, federal entry imminent." Mar-a-Lago's private guards braced themselves at the front gate, but fear crept through their stance. They knew they were seconds away from being overwhelmed. Inside the crisis room, alarms blared louder, overlapping with frantic radio chatter. One of the advisors ran to the window and whispered, "They're coming in. Both outside and possibly from inside. We're surrounded on every front." A sudden explosion of shouting erupted below as federal agents approached the main entrance in formation. Their boots struck the stone steps rhythmically, slow, steady, unstoppable. On the third step, the lead agent paused and raised his hand into the air. The entire front line froze. The crowd held its breath. The estate seemed to stop breathing. And then, from inside Mar-a-Lago, a voice shouted, "Don't open that door!" But it was too late. The lead agent pushed forward. A deafening click echoed as the grand door began to unlock from the inside. Someone within the house was opening it, not resisting, not negotiating, opening it. Every camera in the world zoomed in. Every reporter fell silent. Every guard, federal and private, lifted their weapons instinctively, because when the door swung open, the figure who stepped into the doorway made everyone realize this wasn't about an arrest anymore. This was about something far bigger, far deeper, and far more dangerous than anyone had understood. And the real showdown, the one everyone feared but no one expected, was only just beginning.